Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. And also, while you drift off into a beautiful state of rest, I will be sharing with you a bedtime story. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you fall asleep. So, as we start this episode, I am feeling a real sense of delight in the evolution of this podcast. For those of you who are on my mailing list, you have likely received the email I sent out this week that was titled "The Delightful Absurdity of My Podcast." And side note, if you're not on my mailing list, you can go over to my website, illuminatingsouls.com, and sign up, and you'll hear all about my offerings and musings that I do outside of this broadcast. But back to the delightful absurdity of my podcast, it really struck me as I was typing out the title for episode 81. I haven't really come up with a unique, interesting way to title these episodes. I'm a girl who names things what they are. I don't tend to get very poetic as I'm naming things. And I think the title is called Divine Love and TV Guide, March 1978. And it's a crazy mashup. Anybody with a head for marketing would say, that's a terrible idea. You are courting two remarkably different audiences. And I would say, I guess on the surface you're right, but the content of these episodes really suits who I am. And so my hope is, by extension, it suits who you are. I often talk about the duality of this journey, and especially the duality of my journey. I often contemplate myself, for instance, when I am doing sessions or teaching classes. I go into what I call practitioner mode. It's a very specific focus of consciousness that I go into, where I call the angels in, and I open my heart and my soul, and I bring forward waves of love in service to another. And then when I'm not in practitioner mode, I'm in Earth Girl mode. And my Earth Girl self is the one who goes to Costco on Sundays and watches bad reality television and gets overwhelmed. And I think sometimes on the spiritual journey, there's this belief that somehow we are supposed to be ascending into enlightenment. And listen, I think if we're talking about a soul's journey, that's a pretty cool concept. And yet, I've never felt that it's attainable for me in this lifetime. I'm having a very, very, very human experience as 99.9% of people on planet Earth are. And these spiritual concepts are beautiful. And as one of my teachers says, it's one thing to learn a spiritual concept. It can take a lifetime or lifetimes to learn to embody them. So, these beautiful spiritual concepts and these waves of divine love that I share with you, well, they're here for me too. And so the first part of every podcast is about bringing the angels in, bringing in that beautiful, soothing, loving light that I don't know about you, but for me, it lets me take a big, deep breath in and just relax and receive. This energy is a healing elixir for me. It helps center me. It helps me remember who I am. And then it typically makes it much easier for me to be an earth girl. And so this is what I've been contemplating, that somehow, without it even being consciously intentional, I have created a podcast that reflects my practitioner self and my earth girl. So welcome to my world. This is my world. I love calling in the angels. I love the energy. I love the spiritual wisdom. It shifts me. It supports me. And I also love life here on planet Earth. And so this podcast is a little bit of both of those things. And as far as a much wider audience, I don't know how this will float out in the greater world, but right now it doesn't really matter, because what matters is it works for us, because here you are with me, listening to me ramble. Like I get to be it all, right? You don't have to try to listen to super important spiritual concepts and wonder if you can embody them at some point. We're all works in progress. This journey is not a goal, it's an evolution. It's a progression. And we have good days and we have not so good days. We have moments when we embody grace. And there's moments when life feels very, very messy and clumsy. Wherever you are on that bell curve, the angels and I send you love. And if you're not quite sure about who or what the angels are, I'll share with you my perspective. I experience the angels as divine messengers of God. They are celestial beings. They are the embodiment of divine love. And they're here for all of us, not just some of us. That it's part of the soul's journey to receive love in this lifetime, whether the conscious personality self is aware of this or not. And when we open to the angels, it amplifies our connection with these waves of love. The angels are filled with a generosity of spirit. They will never turn away from you. They will never criticize you. They are here to help inspire you. They are here to comfort you. And they are here to help you walk your authentic path of light. So even though the angels are already here, I'm going to invite them to be with us now. So I invite you to close your eyes if they're not already closed and take some nice deep breaths in and out. And beautiful angels on high, We invite you to join us here now. And angels, I ask that you bring waves of love to each of our beloveds listening to this message. Wherever they are in this moment, I ask that you infuse the space that they are in with the soft pink light of God's love. And angels, I ask that you clear away anything that does not belong to us. Any old energies we no longer need to carry. I ask that you clear our energy fields through the heart of God, that we may be in the brightness of our true, authentic self. Angels, I ask that you help us open to the portals of opportunities that are here, helping us connect with the sparks of inspiration and the ability to follow through with inspired action. And I ask that each one of us here has a good expanse of rest, that our dreams are sweet. And angels, I thank you for all of this love and so much more as you sprinkle blessings upon our path. And to each one of you listening to this message, my sweet, beloved friend, I thank God for the gift of you, because you are a blessing in this world. You make this world better, whether you know it or not. You are a portal of light, and I am so deeply grateful for you. So go ahead and take a nice deep breath in and allow the angels to bring to you calming and soothing energy. And just breathe this into every cell of your body, every thought in your mind, and every emotion in your heart. Allow these sweet waves of love to hold you aloft so that you can simply float in the loving. Knowing that your angels are watching over you. They are helping you find your way. And there are sweet, sweet blessings that are being seeded on your path. You have beautiful adventures to look forward to still. There is laughter in this world to be experienced by you. There are warm hugs, beautiful sunsets, and a myriad of things that will delight you in the days and weeks and months to come. We invite you to breathe in the goodness of this moment, the sweetness of this experience. As the angels bring to you the vibration of well-being, even if your personality self is not feeling well-being right now, the angels bring you this vibration so that you can feel it and sense it, and if not right now, in the days ahead. So just breathe. Just breathe and allow the loving, healing light of your angels to come to you now. There's nothing you need to do. Just be. Just be you right now, here. The angels are so grateful for this opportunity to be of loving service for you. And they're also rippling this love beyond this moment to everything and everyone that you love. We say a prayer in their name. We ripple this love into your personal sphere of love and beyond, so that this love grows exponentially. And as it does, it grows in magnitude for you. So just breathe and know that you are part of the ripple of goodness that is taking place right now. And we thank you for saying yes to this moment. And dear one, if there are any prayers that are in your heart that you wish to share with the angels and with God, we invite you to bring them forward. You can say them silently. You can say them out loud. It is up to you, but the angels will hear you and amplify your prayers. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment or two to give you a chance to bring your prayers into your heart. The angels say thank you. They will continue listening to your prayers and amplifying them in your name. So dear, when you go ahead and get comfortable, cozy on up and snuggle on in. And while you do, I'm going to tell you a story. So my friends, I'm guided to take us back to Anne of Green Gables. I love reading this book, both silently and out loud. But one of the things about reading it out loud is that each word and the descriptive language that Lucy Maud Montgomery uses just really comes to life. You know, for most of us, when we read to ourselves, when we read silently, the words in the sentences weave together and we metabolize it differently than we do with a spoken word. I was just sharing this with some friends last week, and I read to them this first sentence of this chapter. And this is chapter 20, A Good Imagination Gone Wrong. But just listen to this language for a moment. Spring had come once more to Green Gables. The beautiful, capricious, reluctant Canadian spring, lingering along through May and April in a succession of sweet, fresh, chilly days, with pink sunsets and miracles of resurrection and growth. I mean, isn't that beautiful language? The beautiful, capricious, reluctant Canadian spring. See, if I was reading this to myself, I would have just been like, okay, it's spring, right? I metabolize the information differently than I do when I'm hearing it out loud or reading it out loud. So I'm so excited to be able to read this to you. and enjoy the story and the language. And if you're new to Anne of Green Gables, I always give this long rambling introduction, which basically says Anne is an orphan who's been adopted by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert and their brother and sister, who are a bit older and own this farm called Green Gables. And Anne is a wonder. She is bright, and she is imaginative, and she is very dramatic. She is larger than life. I like to think that I'm like Anne, but I think I'm much more like Diana, her best friend, her bosom buddy. Diana follows the rules, right? Diana really wants to please others. And in life, I tend to be more like that. And I think of Anne more with this fairy energy. Like, she doesn't like rules. She doesn't live to please other people. She has this profound affinity for nature and the rhythm of life. And that reminds me much more of fairy energy. And so, especially as a girl, so at the age that Anne and Diana are, I would have for sure wanted to be Anne's friend, because I always loved having friends that would stretch me beyond what I thought we could do. You know, Anne would be the one, come on, let's go to the waterfall. And I'd be like, I don't know, my mom told me I can't go. And she'd be like, come on, it'll be fun. And then I'd go, okay. So I always wanted a friend like Anne. And I tended to gravitate towards the friends who would help me break out of my own perspective of who I thought I needed to be. So here we are. Chapter 20, A Good Imagination Gone Wrong. And I'm going to read you this sentence again because I love it. So spring had come once more to Green Gables. The beautiful, capricious, reluctant Canadian spring, lingering along through April and May into a succession of sweet, fresh, chilly days, with pink sunsets and miracles of resurrection and growth. And I have to say, the perfectionist in me, the rule follower, I want to acknowledge that the first time I read that sentence to you, I said through May and April, and I didn't go back and correct it. And it's making me crazy, but I don't want to go re-record it. So since hopefully you're asleep, you won't notice that I made a mistake the first time I read it. we'll just keep going. That I give myself permission to be here imperfectly, because someone with fairy energy wouldn't have cared. Only people with angel energy who are trying to follow all the rules get hung up in things like that. So I'm going to take a page from Anne's book and move boldly ahead with you. The maples in Lover's Lane were red-budded, and little curly ferns pushed up around the dryad's bubble. Away up in the barrens behind Mr. Silas Sloane's place, the mayflowers blossomed out, pink and white stars of sweetness under their brown leaves. All the schoolgirls and boys had one golden afternoon gathering them, coming home in the clear, echoing twilight with arms and baskets full of flowering spoils. I'm so sorry for people who live in lands where there are no mayflowers, said Anne. Diana says perhaps they have something better, but there couldn't be anything better than mayflowers, could there, Marilla? And Diana says if they don't know what they are like, they don't miss them. But I think that is the saddest thing of all. I think it would be tragic, Marilla, not to know what mayflowers are like and not to miss them. Do you know what I think mayflowers are, Marilla? I think they must be the souls of the flowers that died last summer, and this is their heaven. Isn't that wonderful? I love Anne. Okay, I'm going to keep going. But we had a splendid time today, Marilla. We had our lunch down in a big mossy hollow by an old well. Such a romantic spot. Charlie Sloane dared Artie Gillis to jump over it, and Artie did because he wouldn't take a dare. Nobody in school is very fashionable to dare. Mr. Phillips gave all the Mayflowers he found to Prissy Andrews, and I heard him say, "Sweets to the sweet." He got that out of a book, I know, but it shows he has some imagination. I was offered some Mayflowers too, but I rejected them with scorn, which, if you're just joining, alludes to they were from Gilbert Blythe, her arch nemesis. Poor Gilbert, he really likes Anne, but she is angry with him because when they first met, he made fun of the color of her hair. So she's rejecting his Mayflowers with scorn. I can't tell you the person's name because I have vowed never to let it cross my lips. We made wreaths out of Mayflowers and put them on our hats. And when the time came to go home, we marched in procession down the road, 2 by 2, with our bouquets and wreaths singing "My Home on the Hill." Oh, it was so thrilling, Marilla. All Mr. Silas Sloane's folks rushed out to see us, and everybody we met on the road stopped and stared after us. We made such a real sensation. Not much wonder. Such silly doings, was Marilla's response. After the Mayflowers came the violets, and Violet Vale was empurpled with them. Anne walked through it on her way to school with reverent steps and worshipping eyes, as if she trod on holy ground. Somehow, she told Diana, "When I am going through here, I don't really care whether when she's about to say Gilbert's name. So she says, I don't really care whether anybody gets ahead of me in class or not. But when I'm up in school, it's all different and I care as much as ever. There's such a lot of different Annes in me. I sometimes think that is why I'm such a troublesome person. If I was just the one Anne, it would be ever so much more comfortable, but then it wouldn't be half as so interesting." One June evening, when the orchards were pink blossomed again, when the frogs were singing silvery sweet in the marshes about the head of the lake of shining waters, and the air was full of the savor of clover fields and balsamic fir woods, Anne was sitting by her gable window. She had been studying her lessons, but it had grown too dark to see the book, so she had fallen into a wide-eyed reverie, looking out past the boughs of the Snow Queen, once more bestarred with its tufts of blossom. In all essential respects, the little gable chamber was unchanged. The walls were as white, the pincushion as hard, the chairs as stiffly and yellowly upright as ever. Yet the whole character of the room was altered. It was full of new, vital, pulsing personality that seemed to pervade it and to be quite independent of schoolgirl books and dresses and ribbons, and even of the cracked blue jug full of apple blossoms on the table. It was as if all the dreams, sleeping and waking, of its vivid occupant had taken a visible, although unmaterial form, and had tapestried the bare room with splendid filmy tissues of rainbow and moonshine. That is just so beautiful. It was as if all the dreams, sleeping and waking, of its vivid occupant had taken a visible, although unmaterial form, and had tapestried the bare room with splendid filmy tissues of rainbow and moonshine. Oh, I'm just going to take a deep breath on that one. Oh, what a lovely thought as we drift off to sleep. Rainbows and moonshine. So I'll keep going, sorry. Presently, Marilla came briskly in with some of Anne's freshly ironed school aprons. She hung them over a chair and sat down with a short sigh. She had had one of her headaches that afternoon, and although the pain had gone, she felt weak and tuckered out as she expressed it. Anne looked at her with eyes limpid with sympathy. I do truly wish I could have had the headache in your place, Marilla. I would have endured it joyfully for your sake. I guess you did your part in attending to the work and letting me rest, said Marilla. You seem to have gotten on fairly well and made fewer mistakes than usual. Of course, it wasn't exactly necessary to starch Matthew's handkerchiefs, and most people, when they put up a pie in the oven to warm up for dinner, take it out and eat it when it gets hot, instead of leaving it to be burned to a crisp. But that doesn't seem to be your way, evidently. Headaches always left Marilla somewhat sarcastic. Oh, I am so sorry, said Anne petulantly. I never thought about that pie from the moment I put it in the oven until now, although I felt instinctively that there was something missing on the dinner table. I was firmly resolved when you left me in charge this morning not to imagine anything, but keep my thoughts on facts. I did pretty well until I put the pie in, and then an irresistible temptation came to me to imagine I was an enchanted princess, shut up in a lonely tower with a handsome knight riding to my rescue on a coal-black steed. So that is how I came to forget the pie. I didn't know I starched the handkerchiefs. All the time I was ironing, I was trying to think of a name for a new island Diana and I have discovered up the brook. It's the most ravishing spot, Marilla. There are 2 maple trees on it, and the brook flows right around it. At last it struck me that it would be splendid to call it Victoria Island, because we found it on the Queen's birthday. Both Diana and I are very loyal, but I am sorry about that pie and the handkerchiefs. I wanted to be extra good today because it is an anniversary. Do you remember what happened this day last year, Marilla? No, I can't think of anything special. Oh, Marilla, it was the day I came to Green Gables. I shall never forget it. It was the turning point in my life. Well, of course it wouldn't seem so important to you. I've been here for a year and I've been so happy. Of course, I've had my troubles, but one can live down troubles. Are you sorry you kept me, Marilla? No, I can't say I'm sorry, said Marilla, who sometimes wondered how she could have lived before Anne came to Green Gables. No, not exactly sorry. If you've finished your lessons, Anne, I want you to run over and ask Mrs. Barry if she will lend me Diana's apron pattern. Oh, it's too dark, cried Anne. Too dark? Why, it's only twilight, and goodness knows you've gone over often enough after dark. I'll go over early in the morning, said Anne eagerly. I'll get up at sunrise and go over, Marilla. What has got into your head now, Anne Shirley? I want that pattern to cut out your new apron this evening. Go at once and be smart, too. I'll have to go around by the road then, said Anne, taking up her hat reluctantly. Go by the road and waste half an hour? I'd like to catch you. I can't go through the haunted wood, Marilla, cried Anne desperately. Marilla stared. The haunted wood? Are you crazy? What under the canopy is the haunted wood? The spruce wood over the brook, said Anne in a whisper. Fiddlesticks. There is no such thing as a haunted wood anywhere. Who has been telling you such stuff? Nobody, confessed Anne. Diana and I just imagined the wood was haunted. All the places around here are so commonplace. We just got this up for our own amusement. We began it in April. A haunted wood is so very romantic, Marilla. We chose the spruce grove because it is so gloomy. Oh, we have imagined the most harrowing things. There's a white lady walks along the brook just about this time of night and wrings her hands and utters wailing cries. She appears when there is to be a death in the family, and the ghost of a little child haunts the corner up by Idlewild. It creeps up behind you and lays its cold fingers on your hand. Oh, Marilla, it gives me a shudder to think of it. I wouldn't go through the haunted wood after dark now for anything. I'd be sure that white things would reach out from behind the trees and grab me. Did anyone ever hear the like? Exclaimed Marilla, who had listened in dumb amazement. Anne Shirley, do you mean to tell me you believe all that wicked nonsense of your own imagination? Well, not believe exactly, faltered Anne. At least I don't believe it in daylight, but after dark, Marilla, it's different. That's when ghosts walk. There are no such thing as ghosts, Anne. Oh, but there are, Marilla, cried Anne eagerly. I know people who have seen them, and they are some respectable people. I'm going to skip this part because I don't want to be telling. Oh, I know. I hear you. Well, I'm thinking I don't want to tell you ghost stories when you're falling asleep, but then I hear about all of you who love ghost stories, and you're like, come on, Laurel, keep telling us the story. Okay, so it's not, of course, it's Anne of Green Gables, so it's not terrifying. So, okay. We'll keep going. Oh, but Marilla, there are, cried Anne eagerly. I know people who have seen them, and they're respectable people. Charlie Sloane says that his grandmother saw his grandfather driving home the cows one night after he'd been buried for a year. You know Charlie Sloane's grandmother wouldn't tell a story for anything. She's a very religious woman. And Mrs. Thomas's father was pursued home one night by a lamb of fire. Okay, I'm not reading you the rest of that. And he knew it was the spirit of his brother and that it was a warning sign he would die within 9 days. He didn't, but he died 2 years after, so you see, it was really true. And Ruby Gillis says, Anne Shirley interrupted Marilla firmly. I never want to hear you talking in this fashion again. I've had my doubts about that imagination of yours right along. And if this is going to be the outcome of it, I won't countenance any such doing. You'll go right over to the berries, and you'll go through that spruce grove just for a lesson and warning to you, and never let me hear a word out of your head about haunted woods again. And I just have to say, you know what this reminds me of? Is all of those scary ghost stories we told each other as kids in slumber parties. Like, how badly could we scare each other? Okay, we'll keep going. Sorry, I hope you don't mind that I'm interjecting. I feel like we're reading this together, so I get to talk to you while I read. So Anne might plead and cry as she liked, and she did, for her terror was very real. Her imagination had run away with her, and she held the spruce grove in mortal dread after nightfall. But Marilla was stubborn. She marched the shrinking ghost seer down to the spring and ordered her to proceed straight away over the bridge and into the dusky retreats of wailing ladies and ghosts beyond. Oh, Marilla, how can you be so cruel? Sobbed Anne. What would you feel like if a white thing did come and snatch me up and carry me off? I'll risk it, said Marilla unfeelingly. You know I always mean what I say. I'll cure you of imagining ghosts into places. March. Now. And Anne marched. That is, she stumbled over the bridge and went shuddering up the horrible, dim path beyond. Anne never forgot that walk. Bitterly did she repent the license she had given to her imagination. The goblins of her fancy lurked in every shadow about her, reaching out their cold, fleshless hands to grab the terrified small girl who had called them into being. A white strip of birch bark blowing up from the hollow over the brown floor of the grove made her heart stand still. The long-drawn wail of two old boughs rubbing against each other brought out the perspiration in beads on her forehead. The swoop of bats in the darkness over her was the wings of unearthly creatures. When she reached Mr. William Bell's field, she fled across it as if pursued by an army of white things, and arrived at the berry kitchen door so out of breath that she could hardly grasp out her request for the apron pattern. Diana was away so that she had no excuse to linger. The dreadful return journey had to be faced. Anne went back over it with shut eyes, preferring to take the risk of dashing her brains out among the boughs to that of seeing a white thing. When she finally stumbled over the long bridge, she drew out one long, shivering breath of relief. "Well, so nothing caught you," said Marilla unsympathetically. "Oh, Marilla," chattered Anne, "I'll be contented with commonplaces after this." All right, chapter 21, A New Departure in Flavorings. Dear me, is there nothing but meetings and partings in this world, as Mrs. Lynde says, remarked Anne plaintively, putting her slate and books down on the kitchen table on the last day of June and wiping her red eyes with a very damp handkerchief. "Wasn't it fortunate, Marilla, that I took an extra handkerchief to school today? I had a presentiment that it would be needed." "I never thought you were so fond of Mr. Phillips that you'd require 2 handkerchiefs to dry your tears just because he was going away," said Marilla. "I don't think I was crying because I was really so fond of him," reflected Anne. "I just cried because all the others did. It was Ruby Gillis started it. Ruby Gillis has always declared that she hated Mr. Phillips. But just as soon as he got up to make his farewell speech, she burst into tears. Then all the girls began to cry one after the other. I tried to hold out, Marilla. I tried to remember the time Mr. Phillips made me sit with a boy, and the time he spelled my name without an E on the blackboard, and how he said I was the worst dunce he ever saw at geometry and laughed at my spelling, and all the times he had been so horrid and sarcastic, but somehow I couldn't, Marilla. And I just had to cry too. Jane Andrews had been talking for a month about how glad she'd be when Mr. Phillips went away, and when she declared she'd never share a tear. Well, she was worse than any of us and had to borrow a handkerchief from her brother. Well, of course the boys didn't cry because she hadn't brought one of her own, not expecting to need it. Oh, Marilla, it was heart-rending. Mr. Phillips made such a beautiful farewell speech beginning, "The time has come for us to part." It was very affecting, and he had tears in his eyes too, Marilla. Oh, I felt dreadfully sorry and remorseful for all the times I'd talked in school and drawn pictures of him on my slate and made fun of him and Prissy. I can tell you I wished I'd been a model pupil like Minnie Andrews. She hadn't anything on her conscience. The girls cried all the way home from school. Carrie Sloane kept saying every few minutes, "The time has come for us to part," and that would start us off again, whenever we were in danger of cheering up. I do feel dreadfully sad, Marilla, but one can't quite feel in the depths of despair with 2 months' vacation before them, can they, Marilla? And besides, we met the new minister and his wife coming from the station. For all I was feeling so bad about Mr. Phillips going away, I couldn't help taking a little interest in a new minister, could I? His wife is very pretty. Well, not exactly regally lovely, of course. It wouldn't do, I suppose, for a minister to have a regally lovely wife, because it might set a bad example. Mrs. Lynde says the minister's wife over at Newbridge sets a very bad example because she dresses so fashionably. Our new minister's wife was dressed in a blue muslin with lovely puffed sleeves and a hat trimmed with roses. Jane Andrews said she thought puffed sleeves were too worldly for a minister's wife, but I didn't make any such uncharitable remark, Marilla, because I know what it is to have longed for puffed sleeves. Besides, she's only been a minister's wife for a little while, so one should make allowances, shouldn't they? They're going to board with Mrs. Lynde until the manse is ready. If Marilla, in going down to Mrs. Lynde's that evening, was actuated by any motive save her avowed one of returning the quilting frames she had borrowed the preceding winter, it was an amiable weakness shared by most of the Avonlea people. Many a thing Mrs. Lynde had lent, sometimes never expecting to see it again, came home that night in charge of the borrowers thereof. A new minister, and moreover a minister with a wife, was a lawful object of curiosity in a quiet little country settlement where sensations were few and far between. Old Mr. Bentley, the minister whom Anne had found lacking in imagination, had been pastor of Avonlea for 18 years. He was a widower when he came, and a widower he remained despite the fact that gossip regularly married him to this or that or the other one every year of his sojourn. In the preceding February he had resigned his charge and departed amid the regrets of his people, most of whom had the affection born of long intercourse for their good old minister, in spite of his shortcomings as an orator. Since then, the Avonlea church had enjoyed a variety of religious dissipation in listening to many and various candidates and supplies who came Sunday after Sunday to preach on trial. These stood or fell by the judgment of the fathers and mothers in Israel. But a certain small red-haired girl who sat meekly in the corner of the old Cuthbert pew also had her opinions about them and discussed the same in full with Matthew, Marilla always declining from principle to criticize ministers in any shape or form. "I don't think Mr. Smith would have done Matthew," was Anne's final summing up. Mrs. Lynde said his delivery was so poor, but I think his worst fault was just like Mr. Bentley's. He had no imagination. And Mr. Terry had too much. He let it run away with him, just as I did mine in the matter of the haunted woods. Besides, Mrs. Lynde says his theology wasn't sound. Mr. Gresham was a very good man and a very religious man, but he told too many funny stories and made the people laugh in church. He was undignified. And you must have some dignity about a minister, mustn't you, Matthew? I thought Mr. Marshall was decidedly attractive, but Mrs. Lynde says he isn't married or even engaged because she made special inquiries about him, and she says it would never do to have a young unmarried minister in Avonlea because he might marry in the congregation and that would make trouble. Mrs. Lynde is a very far-seeing woman, isn't she, Matthew? I'm very glad they've called Mr. Allen. I liked him because his sermon was interesting, and he prayed as if he meant it and not just as if he did it because it was the habit of it. Mrs. Lynde says he isn't perfect, but she says she supposes we couldn't expect a perfect minister for $750 a year, and anyhow his theology is sound, because she questioned him thoroughly on all the points of doctrine, and she knows his wife's people and they are most respectable, and the women are all good housekeepers. Mrs. Lynde says that sound doctrine in the man and good housekeeping in the woman make an ideal combination for a minister's family. The new minister and his wife were a young, pleasant-faced couple still on their honeymoon, and full of all good and beautiful enthusiasms for their chosen life work. Avonlea opened its heart to them from the start, old and young, like the frank, cheerful young man with his high ideals, and the bright, gentle little lady who assumed the mistress-ship of the manse. With Mrs. Allen, Anne fell promptly and wholeheartedly in love. She had discovered another kindred spirit. "Mrs. Allen is perfectly lovely," she announced one Sunday afternoon. "She's taken our class and she's a splendid teacher. She said right away she didn't think it was fair for the teacher to ask all the questions. And you know, Marilla, that is exactly what I have thought. She said we could ask her any question we liked, and I asked so many. I'm good at asking questions, Marilla." "I believe you," was Marilla's emphatic comment. Nobody else asked any to except Ruby Gillis, and she asked if there were to be a Sunday school picnic this summer. Well, I didn't think that was a very proper question to ask, because it hadn't had any connection with the lesson. The lesson was about Daniel in the lion's den, but Mrs. Allen just smiled, and she said she thought there would be. Mrs. Allen has a lovely smile. She has such exquisite dimples in her cheeks. I wish I had dimples in my cheeks, Marilla. I'm not half so skinny as I was when I came here, but I have no dimples yet. If I had, perhaps I could influence people for more good. Mrs. Allen said we ought to always try to influence other people for good. She talked so nice about everything. I never knew before that religion was such a cheerful thing. I always thought it was kind of melancholy, but Mrs. Allen's isn't. And I'd like to be a Christian if I could be one like her. I wouldn't want to be one like Superintendent Bell." "It's very naughty of you to speak so about Mr. Bell," said Marilla severely. "Mr. Bell is a really good man." "Oh, of course he's good," agreed Anne, "but he doesn't seem to get any comfort out of it. If I could be good, I'd dance and sing all day because I was glad of it. I suppose Mrs. Allen is too old to dance and sing, of course. It wouldn't be dignified in a minister's wife. But I can just feel she's glad she's a Christian and that she'd be one even if she could get into heaven without it. I suppose we must have Mr. and Mrs. Allen up to tea some day soon," said Marilla reflectively. "They've been most everywhere but here. Let me see. Next Wednesday would be a good time to have them, but don't say a word to Matthew about it, for if he knew they were coming, he'd find some excuse to be away that day. He'd gotten so used to Mr. Bentley he didn't mind him, but he's going to find it hard to get acquainted with a new minister, and a new minister's wife will frighten him to death." "I'll be as secret as the dead," assured Anne. "But oh, Marilla, will you let me make a cake for the occasion? I'd love to do something for Mrs. Allen, and you know I can make a pretty good cake by this time." "You can make a layer cake," promised Marilla. Monday and Tuesday great preparations went on at Green Gables. Having the minister and his wife to tea was a serious and important undertaking, and Marilla was determined not to be eclipsed by any of the Avonlea housekeepers. Anne was wild with excitement and delight. She talked it all over with Diana Tuesday night in the twilight as they sat on the big red stones by the Dryad's bubble and made rainbows in the water with little twigs dipped in fir balsam. "Everything is ready, Diana, except my cake, which I am to make in the morning, and the baking powder biscuits, which Marilla will make just before tea time." I assure you, Diana, that Marilla and I have had a busy 2 days of it. It is such a responsibility having a minister's family to tea. I never went through such an experience before. You should just see our pantry. It is a sight to behold. We're going to have jellied chicken and cold tongue. We are to have 2 kinds of jelly, red and yellow, and whipped cream and lemon pie and cherry pie and 3 kinds of cookies and fruit cake and Marilla's famous yellow plum preserves that she keeps especially for ministers, and pound cake and layer cake and biscuits as aforesaid, and new bread and old both in case the minister is dyspeptic and can't eat new. Mrs. Lynde says ministers are dyspeptic, but I don't think Mr. Allen has been a minister long enough for it to have had a bad effect on him. I just grow cold when I think of my layer cake. Oh, Diana, what if it shouldn't be good? I dreamed last night that I was chased all around by a fearful goblin with a big layer cake for a head. It'll be good all right, assured Diana, who was a very comfortable sort of friend. I'm sure that piece of the one that you made that we had for lunch in Idlewild 2 weeks ago was perfectly elegant. Yes, but cakes have such a terrible habit of turning out bad just when you especially want them to be good, sighed Anne, setting a particularly well balsamed twig afloat. However, I suppose I shall just have to trust to Providence and be careful to put in the flour. Oh, look, Diana, what a lovely rainbow. Do you suppose the dryad will come out after we go away and take it for a scarf? And with that, we're going to stop here for now. We'll find out about how Anne's cake turns out in a later episode. But for now, the angels and I wish you sweet dreams. You are a blessing in this world, and I am so deeply grateful for you. Thank you for letting me share this time with you. Rest well, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.